third point, with all due respect, IRA was a serious threat, but IRA is not an existentialist threat like Al-Qaeda, and the way you adopt coercion in the context of non-existentialist threat is very different than you do it in the context of an existentialist threat. I don't see us settling down with Al-Qaeda the way you resolve things with IRA.
The gentleman's time has long since expired. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rivkin, let me begin with you. I had a chance to read the op-ed piece that you wrote in the Journal last week, and some of your positions are interesting in that they're extremely provocative, so I want to pose a couple of questions to you. You just mentioned the Vietnam War. Did the United States military apply the Geneva Convention to captured Viet Cong operatives?
It's a complicated question, Congressman Davis. Basically, the position of the United States government was that the Viet Cong was not legally entitled to Geneva protections. We extended it as a matter of a policy grace, largely, as I understand it, I'm too young, of course, to have a personal knowledge, but people I talked to, largely because the Viet Cong threatened American prisoners who, God knows, were not treated particularly well, but could have been treated a lot worse.
Well, let me take up that particular logic and apply it to another scenario. Let's say that Hezbollah, a known terrorist organization, were to capture an Israeli soldier and to take that individual into custody and to subject that individual to sleep deprivation, physical abuse, physical degradation, any number of things that might strike some people, most especially including that Israeli soldier experiencing the pain as torture. Should that Israeli soldier and his government be able to invoke the Geneva Convention against Hezbollah?
There are two answers to that, Congressman David. The legal question is, the legal answer is this. If you are a lawful combatant, the fact that the people who have captured you are unlawful combatant and themselves upon capture would not be entitled to the gold standard of the Geneva Convention does not mean that you are not. So this is a non-reciprocity situation.
Do you think Hezbollah would adopt that interpretation, or you think Al-Qaeda would adopt that interpretation?
No, I understand the question.
You trust them to?
The practical answer is easy, and I don't mean to sound glib, but let me suggest this. Given the absolutely atrocious medieval level of barbarism that is routinely inflicted by unlawful combatants, by Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, where we're talking about not just torturing people, but dismembering people and killing. There are plenty of examples of it in Iraq. If I were captured and my choice was being accorded the treatment that they generally accord to Westerners versus being treated as somebody in Guantanamo, I would sign up.
Well, of course, that wasn't the question I asked you. Of course, that wasn't the question I asked you. So let me perhaps come at the question a little bit differently. Does the Israeli government apply the Geneva Convention to captured Hezbollah operatives or captured Hamas operatives?
Israeli government's position, as I understand it, is fairly complex. They believe that the state of armed conflict exists. They generally apply Geneva Conventions. They signed Protocol 1 additional, which we have not signed. But is
torture legal or illegal in Israel?
Excuse me?
Is torture legal or illegal in Israel?
The torture in Israel is illegal. However, Israelis in appropriate circumstances do use stress techniques. Their court has been quite involved in this issue.
Well, no, let me stop you at this point, because you're doing what witnesses like to do, which is talking fast enough that the questioner can't get a question in if the time runs out. So let me slow you down, because you've just said some very interesting things. I want to make sure everyone hears them. Israel, a democracy like ours, that is under daily siege from the most vicious, murderous assailants imaginable, which faces an existential threat to its existence. They're very small, 10 miles at the smallest point, makes torture illegal, applies the Geneva Convention, and they apply it to armies or quasi-armies with a history of being willing to kill women and children. It would seem to me that those aren't incidental points to be talked over and talked around. those are very significant moral propositions. Mr. Sands, would you like to comment on that? Do you see the point that I'm making?
Well, I do so very much see your point, and it's a point that is also made in relation to the United Kingdom. I mean, we have had, sadly, terrorist attacks on our territory. One of the bombs in July the 7th went away 100 yards from the law school that I teach at. I've followed the Israeli situation very carefully. The Israeli Supreme Court, and I think Mr. Rivkin was about to refer to it, gave a very famous judgment in which it said in relation to torture, firstly, it is the lot of a democracy to fight with one arm tied behind its back, but the democracy is still stronger because that is who we are. But secondly, it rejected the ticking time bomb theory. This is the theory that everyone raises, and yet ask anyone to find a single example in which the ticking time bomb theory situation has arisen, and no one can identify one. And with great respect, the way the Supreme Court of Israel dealt with it is the right way. Never means never. If a ticking time bomb scenario comes up, which we say is completely hypothetical, we'll deal with it when it arises.
Mr. Rivkin, if the Chair will indulge me just one last hypothetical to you. Should the President of the United States issue a pardon to members of the executive branch who may be accused in the future of having violated statutes related to torture?
In the current circumstances?
It's hypothetical. Should the President of the United States issue a pardon before he leaves office to members of his executive branch who may be accused in the future of having violated statutes relating to torture?
I have not considered this question carefully, but I would imagine there would be some reasons to do so. I frankly think, as useful as the exploration of those issues is, it can go too far, and it can certainly handicap our future.
Mr. Rivkin, would you seriously suggest that a president issue a blanket pardon to members of his administration? Because this is the standard for a pardon, typically, under precedent, that someone be convicted of a crime or have acknowledged culpability for a crime. Has any member of the Bush administration been convicted of a crime related to torture?
No, but
have any of them acknowledged responsibility for such a crime?
You asked me a hypothetical question. All I'm saying is I have not studied this question in detail. I said there may be some reasons to consider doing that. Let me remind you that the blanket
I would suggest to you that it would be extraordinary.
Precedented. President Carter, for example, issued a blanket pardon to the Vietnam War related let's say people who got in trouble in connection with the Vietnam War. But I'm not advocating for it. You asked me a hypothetical. The easiest answer is to say I don't answer hypotheticals. I'm trying to be forthcoming. I said it's something to consider. I did not say that it's something to do. But my only 10-second point is this. If you look at Israel, they did make a choice in a transparent fashion as accountable democratic body polity. They do use stress techniques of interrogation. I don't think that in certain circumstances. I don't think that that's at least my sense from talking to a lot of Israelis. But yes, they've made a decision to take higher risks, and that certainly is to consider.
Time of the gentleman has expired.